911, police, fire, ambulance.
Yes, hello?
Hi, 911. Do you need the police or the ambulance?
Yes, ma'am. I need the police.
To what address? And what's going on there?
A murder has been committed.
Oh, a murder has been committed? By who?
By me, ma'am.
By you?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you murder?
I murdered my wife.
Isaac Carter was a man of unwavering principles, the kind of person people trusted implicitly. At 48, he was the embodiment of hard work and integrity, running a small but respected construction business. Over the years, Isaac had built a reputation not just as a contractor but as a man who poured his heart and soul into every project. His crew, handpicked for their dedication and skill, admired him for his leadership and fairness. Isaac didn't just build homes, he crafted sanctuaries, priding himself on attention to detail and a personal connection with each client. He often said that his work was a reflection of who he was, a man who valued precision, honesty, and stability. His personal life mirrored the stability he sought in his work. Isaac had been married to Angela for 25 years, a relationship that had begun in the most romantic of circumstances. Angela, then a 20-year-old law student, had been captivated by Isaac's charisma when they first met. He had been a local football star, his natural athleticism and confidence drawing attention wherever he went. Despite their differences, Angela was ambitious and studious, while Isaac was grounded and practical. They had found in each other a balance that seemed unshakable. Over the years, their marriage became a partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering support. Angela, now 43, had risen to become a respected judge. Her work was a source of pride for Isaac, who often boasted about her accomplishments to anyone who would listen. She was strikingly beautiful, with a grace and poise that commanded attention both in and out of the courtroom. Her sharp mind and compassionate nature made her a favorite among her colleagues and a trusted figure in the community. At home, Angela was no less remarkable, dedicated to their marriage and a loving partner who valued the quiet moments they shared after long days. Yet, for all their achievements and the strong bond they shared, there was one gap in their lives they had never been able to fill: children. The couple had tried for years to start a family, but after multiple disappointments, they had reluctantly accepted that it wasn't meant to be. Angela couldn't get pregnant. While they rarely spoke about it, the absence lingered as a quiet, unspoken sorrow between them. Isaac had recently taken on the role of mentor to his nephew, Darnell, a 21-year-old with more energy than focus. Darnell had been struggling to find his way in life, drifting from one dead-end job to another, until Isaac stepped in. Believing in the importance of family, Isaac offered Darnell a place on his crew, hoping to teach him the trade and instill the values that had guided his own life. Darnell was a stark contrast to Isaac, brash, cocky, and full of wild stories about his exploits with older women. While Isaac often laughed at these tales, brushing them off as exaggerations, he enjoyed Darnell's youthful enthusiasm and saw potential in the young man. Their relationship had become a blend of mentorship and camaraderie, with Darnell looking up to Isaac as a role model. Despite the outward appearance of stability and happiness, subtle cracks were beginning to form in Isaac's personal life. Over the past few months, he had noticed changes in Angela. Conversations between them had grown shorter, their once vibrant connection now reduced to routine exchanges about schedules and responsibilities. The intimacy that had once defined their marriage seemed to have faded, replaced by a polite but distant coexistence. Isaac, ever the optimist, tried to brush off his concerns, convincing himself that it was simply the result of busy schedules and the natural ebb and flow of long-term relationships. Beneath his quiet demeanor, Isaac was grappling with the fear that their once strong bond was slipping away. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but the sense of distance between them felt insurmountable. Yet, even as he struggled with his doubts, Isaac remained committed to the values that had always guided him: honesty, loyalty, and the belief that family was worth fighting for. He just didn't realize how far that fight would take him, or how devastating the consequences would be. In the weeks leading up to that pivotal evening, Isaac had grown increasingly aware of a shift in his relationship with Angela. Their home, once filled with the warmth of shared laughter and late-night conversations, had become eerily quiet. Isaac, a man who prided himself on his ability to solve problems, found himself at a loss. Angela seemed preoccupied, often retreating into silence after long days at work. Their conversations, once fluid and engaging, now felt stilted, limited to the logistics of daily life, schedules, appointments, and work obligations. The intimacy that had once been the cornerstone of their marriage had vanished, leaving a hollow space that Isaac couldn't ignore. At work, Isaac's uncharacteristic distraction didn't go unnoticed. He was typically the first to arrive and the last to leave, setting an example for his crew with his tireless work ethic. But lately, his mind wandered, his focus slipping as he replayed moments from home in his head. The strain was evident in the way he lingered over tasks, his usual efficiency replaced by an unusual hesitancy. Darnell, always attuned to his uncle's moods, was the first to comment. Though often brash and full of bravado, Darnell had a way of cutting through pretenses, and he pressed Isaac until he finally admitted that things weren't as they used to be with Angela. Isaac revealed the growing coldness between them, describing how Angela seemed distant and withdrawn. For a man like Isaac, who valued honesty and communication, the lack of connection was both confusing and painful. Darnell, ever eager to offer solutions, suggested that Isaac take matters into his own hands. He encouraged him to plan a romantic evening for Angela, a gesture that would show her how much she meant to him. Inspired by the idea, Isaac decided to surprise Angela that very evening. Determined to reignite the spark in their relationship, he left the construction site earlier than usual, a rare occurrence that his crew noted with curiosity. Stopping at a local florist, Isaac carefully selected a bouquet of Angela's favorite flowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the gray skies of Detroit in late autumn. He then headed to the grocery store, choosing ingredients for Angela's favorite meal, a dish she had once praised as one of his finest. As he filled his cart, Isaac's thoughts were consumed with memories of happier times, the early days of their marriage, the spontaneous dates, and the moments of quiet joy they had shared. He was convinced that with the right gesture, he could bridge the growing gap between them. When he arrived home, the house was still and empty, as Angela was not yet back from court. Isaac placed the flowers in a vase on the dining table, their fresh scent filling the room as he began preparing dinner. The kitchen, always his sanctuary, became a space of hope that evening. He chopped vegetables, seasoned meat, and hummed quietly to himself, imagining the look of surprise and gratitude on Angela's face when she walked through the door. While retrieving a skillet from a cabinet, Isaac accidentally knocked over a small box. The contents spilled onto the floor, scattering papers and items he didn't immediately recognize. As he crouched to pick them up, one object caught his eye, a pregnancy test. Holding it in his hand, he noticed the result was positive. For a moment, he was frozen, his mind racing to process what he had found. A flood of emotions washed over him, joy, disbelief, and confusion all mingling together. After years of longing, could this be the moment they had dreamed of? But then questions began to surface. Why hadn't Angela told him? Why had she hidden something so monumental? Isaac placed the test on the counter, his initial excitement giving way to unease. He reached into his pocket for his phone, intending to call Angela, but realized it wasn't there. Panic set in as he remembered leaving it at the construction site earlier in the day. He quickly grabbed his keys, determined to retrieve it and, perhaps, find clarity in the process. As he left the house, the flowers sat undisturbed on the table, their vibrant petals a silent witness to the unraveling that had just begun. Isaac's mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. The sense of unease that had been quietly building now loomed large, threatening to upend the very foundation of the life he had worked so hard to build. What should have been a moment of hope was quickly becoming the spark that would ignite a tragic sequence of events. Isaac's drive back to the construction site was filled with a mixture of emotions. The discovery of the pregnancy test had stirred feelings he hadn't allowed himself to hope for in years. Could Angela finally be pregnant? The thought brought both joy and confusion. Why hadn't she shared the news with him? It was unlike Angela to keep secrets, especially something so monumental. The unanswered questions gnawed at him as he drove through the dimly lit streets, the glow of streetlights casting fleeting shadows across his dashboard. He focused on retrieving his phone, convincing himself that once he spoke to Angela, everything would make sense. When Isaac pulled up to the nearly completed house, his attention was immediately drawn to a car parked outside. He recognized it instantly, Angela's sleek sedan, a familiar sight in their driveway. A sense of unease began to creep in, mingling with his earlier confusion. Angela wasn't supposed to be there. She had told him she would be working late, catching up on court cases. Isaac stepped out of his truck, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached the house. The faint glow of lights from the upper floor confirmed someone was inside. Isaac entered the house cautiously, the unfinished interior amplifying every sound. His boots echoed on the bare wooden floors as he walked toward the stairs. As he climbed, he noticed muffled voices filtering through the quiet, their tone intimate and familiar. His heart began to pound, each step up the staircase feeling heavier than the last. At the top, he paused, his hand resting on the banister as he steadied himself. The voices were clearer now, coming from one of the upstairs rooms. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Isaac moved closer, his breath shallow as he peered through the narrow opening. What he saw made his blood run cold. Angela was in Darnell's arms, their bodies close in an unmistakable embrace. The image was a betrayal he hadn't even considered possible. His nephew, the young man he had mentored and taken under his wing, was entwined with his wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for more than 2 decades. For a moment, Isaac couldn't move, his mind struggling to reconcile the scene before him with the life he thought he knew. Time seemed to slow as Isaac's emotions surged. Disbelief gave way to anger, then to a deep, guttural pain that radiated through his chest. The realization of what he had stumbled upon shattered any semblance of control he had left. The doubts that had plagued him in recent weeks now felt like a cruel premonition of this moment. He backed away from the door, his movements clumsy as he tried to make sense of what he had seen. His heart raced, and his breathing became erratic as the weight of the betrayal bore down on him. In that instant, Isaac's mind was consumed by a singular thought. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, had been destroyed. The life he had built with Angela, the values he had tried to instill in Darnell, now felt like hollow lies. As he stood in the dimly lit hallway, the sounds of their voices still drifting from the room, something inside Isaac snapped. His emotions, raw and unchecked, surged to the surface, overtaking any sense of reason or restraint. Isaac's eyes darted around the hallway, his gaze falling on a toolbox left behind by one of his crew. Without thinking, he reached down and grabbed the first object he could find, a heavy crowbar. The cold metal felt solid in his hands, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling in his mind. Clutching it tightly, he turned back toward the door, his footsteps deliberate as he crossed the threshold. The voices inside ceased abruptly as his shadow fell across the room, but by then, the course of events had already been set into motion. Isaac's mind was a storm of emotion as he stepped into the room. His grip on the crowbar tightened, the cold metal digging into his palm as he crossed the threshold. The betrayal he had witnessed moments earlier was a wound that seemed to tear deeper with every second, each breath stoking the fire of his rage. Angela and Darnell froze at the sight of him, their expressions shifting from surprise to terror as they registered the object in his hand and the fury etched into his face. Without a word, Isaac lunged toward Darnell. The crowbar swung through the air with a sickening force, connecting with the side of the young man's head. The impact was immediate and devastating, sending Darnell sprawling to the floor. Angela's scream cut through the silence, high and piercing, but Isaac was beyond hearing. His gaze turned to her, his face a mask of anguish and fury. Angela backed away, her hands raised defensively, but there was nowhere to go. The small room offered no escape. Isaac advanced, his movements mechanical, as though driven by something outside himself. The crowbar came down again, striking her shoulder with a crack that echoed through the house. She stumbled, falling to her knees, but he didn't stop. Blow after blow rained down, each one fueled by the betrayal that burned in his chest. When it was over, Isaac stood over their lifeless bodies, his chest heaving with the exertion and the weight of what he had done. The crowbar slipped from his bloodied fingers, hitting the floor with a dull clang that reverberated in the now deafening quiet. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he looked down at the scene before him, the nephew he had mentored, the wife he had loved for 25 years, both lying motionless in a crimson pool that spread across the wooden floor. The adrenaline coursing through Isaac's veins began to subside, replaced by a cold, sinking realization of the gravity of his actions. His gaze flicked around the room, taking in the blood-streaked walls, the shattered remnants of the life he thought he had known. Panic gripped him, his mind racing to comprehend the irreversible choices he had made. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The weight of his guilt was too heavy to carry. In a haze, Isaac moved to the toolbox near the door and retrieved heavy-duty plastic sheeting and duct tape. His hands shook as he worked, wrapping the bodies tightly to contain the blood. Each movement felt surreal, as though he were watching himself from outside his body. The room was eerily quiet except for the sound of his labored breathing and the rustling of the plastic. When the task was complete, Isaac dragged the bodies down the stairs, their weight adding to his physical and emotional exhaustion. He carried them to the basement, where bags of concrete mix sat waiting for the next day's work. Isaac tore them open, dumping the dry mixture into a large barrel he had intended for pouring a foundation. He fetched water from the nearby sink, stirring the mixture until it reached the right consistency. His movements were methodical, almost robotic, as he poured the wet concrete over the wrapped bodies. The thick gray sludge coated them, erasing the evidence of what had occurred. When the last of the mixture had been poured, Isaac stood back, his hands caked in cement and his body trembling. The basement was quiet except for the faint drip of water from the sink. The enormity of what he had done began to settle over him, pressing down like a physical weight. He looked at the barrel, the wet concrete slowly beginning to harden, and felt a wave of nausea rise in his chest. Isaac dropped to his knees, his head in his hands, as he grappled with the reality of his actions. The rage that had driven him moments earlier was gone, leaving only despair and regret in its place. He had crossed a line he could never return from, destroying not only 2 lives, but everything he had built for himself. The man who had once valued honesty and family above all else now sat surrounded by the evidence of his darkest impulses. As the minutes dragged on, Isaac understood that he could not live with what he had done. The guilt was too much to bear, and the thought of spending the rest of his life hiding the truth felt like its own form of imprisonment. Trembling, he reached for a phone. His fingers hovered over the buttons for a moment before he dialed 911. His voice was hollow and broken as he confessed to the murders, providing the address and explaining what he had done. When the call ended, Isaac sat on the cold basement floor, his gaze fixed on the slowly hardening concrete. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder in the distance, their wailing a harbinger of the reckoning to come. Isaac didn't move. He knew there was nothing left to do but wait. When the police arrived at the scene, the sirens' wails were joined by the bright flash of red and blue lights reflecting off the unfinished house. Officers entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floors as they called out for anyone inside. They found Isaac in the basement, sitting slumped against the wall, his hands resting limply on his knees. The air was heavy with the pungent scent of wet concrete, which still glistened under the dim basement light. Isaac, covered in dust and sweat, raised his head as the officers approached. Without hesitation, he confessed to the murders, his voice hollow and devoid of emotion. The officers quickly secured the scene, noting the unset concrete in the pit at the center of the room. It didn't take long for them to uncover the truth beneath the surface. Using tools to break through the thickening mixture, they unearthed the plastic-wrapped bodies of Angela and Darnell. The grim task was carried out in silence, the weight of the discovery palpable among the officers. The room, already suffocating with tension, grew heavier with each shovelful of concrete that revealed the remains. By the time they finished, the full horror of Isaac's actions had come to light. Isaac was placed under arrest and escorted out of the house in handcuffs, his expression blank as he was led past the gathering crowd of neighbors and reporters. The once respected builder, a man known for his devotion to family and his moral code, had become the subject of one of Detroit's most shocking crimes. News of the murders spread rapidly, the details of the case gripping the city and sparking widespread outrage and disbelief. During the trial, Isaac pleaded guilty to both murders, foregoing any attempt to defend or justify his actions. His attorney described his deep remorse, but Isaac's own testimony was what truly revealed the torment he felt. He admitted that he had been consumed by a blinding rage, but he took full responsibility for his actions, acknowledging that his emotions could never excuse the lives he had taken. The courtroom was silent as Isaac recounted the events that had led to the tragedy, his voice trembling with grief and regret. The prosecution, while recognizing Isaac's remorse, emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime. They detailed how he had methodically covered up the murders, pointing to the concrete as evidence of his attempt to conceal his actions. Photographs of the crime scene, including the broken door, the bloodied crowbar, and the unearthed bodies, were shown to the jury. Each image painted a stark picture of the brutality that had unfolded in the unfinished house. The judge, moved by Isaac's remorse but bound by the law, handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In his final remarks, the judge spoke of the deep betrayal and irreversible harm Isaac had caused, not only to his victims but to the community that had once admired him. The verdict brought a sense of closure to some, but for others, it was a somber reminder of how far a good man could fall. Angela's colleagues in the judiciary held a memorial in her honor, celebrating her life and the impact she had made as a compassionate and principled judge. Her work in the courtroom had earned her respect and admiration, and her loss was felt deeply among her peers. Friends and family described her as a beacon of fairness and integrity, qualities that now stood in stark contrast to the betrayal she had suffered. Darnell's family struggled to reconcile their grief with the knowledge of his role in the affair. While mourning the loss of a young man with so much potential, they also faced the harsh reality of his actions and their contribution to the tragedy. The dual nature of their grief was a heavy burden, compounded by the public scrutiny that followed the case. The unfinished house where the murders occurred remained vacant, a haunting symbol of the events that had transpired within its walls. The owners, unable to move forward with the project, abandoned it altogether. Over time, the structure became a decaying monument to broken trust and irrevocable loss, its presence a stark reminder to the neighborhood of how quickly love and loyalty could turn into tragedy. Isaac spent his remaining years in prison, a solitary figure haunted by the lives he had destroyed. He reflected endlessly on the choices that had led him to that basement, replaying the moments that had unraveled his life. The walls of his cell became a constant reminder of his downfall, a place where the ideals he had once held, honesty, family, integrity, were reduced to empty words. In the end, Isaac's legacy was not the homes he built or the values he once championed, but the irrevocable damage wrought by a single moment of madness.